So good evening, everyone. I'm Doug Rux. I'm your Community Development Director. And this evening we'll be conducting our open house on a virtual open house on our urban renewal program. We have with us this evening Elaine Howard from Elaine Howard Consulting. Elaine is contracting with us and assisting our Citizens Advisory Committee and staff in putting together the Urban Renewal Feasibility Study, which we'll talk about a little later, and the Urban Renewal Plan and Report. The way we're going to approach this evening, and Elaine and I are going to go through a PowerPoint presentation. And then when we've completed with that, then we'll open it up and we'll invite people up to be panelists, and we can have the opportunity for questions and answers. If you have a question as we're going through the presentation, you can always type that into the chat, and then we will capture that and make sure that we answer your questions that way as well. So, Sue, next slide. So the first part of this is the roadmap of where we're going to go this evening. It'll probably take us around 30 minutes to get through this presentation, but we're going to talk about why we're considering doing an urban renewal program, and there's history behind that. All the planning work that we've done to date, which brings us to the point where we are this evening. We'll talk about the Citizens Advisory Committee, how much they've met, who the members are. We'll show you a presentation or a map of our proposed urban renewal district boundary. We've gone through community engagement activities as we were preparing the feasibility study, and we'll do a recap on that. Elaine will talk about the feasibility study itself and what was in that and conclusions. And then I'll run through and talk about the projects that our Citizen Advisory Committee has been working on over the last 3 or 4 months. And then we'll conclude with some next steps. And again, then we'll open it up for some questions and answers with our participants. And I believe the last time I checked, we had about 9 attendees this evening. So thank you to those who took time out of your evening to be with us. Sue, next slide. So why are we considering doing an urban renewal? The City Council's had this as a priority since 2016, and it started with activities in our Newberg Economic Development Strategy. And then it moved into some other documents I'll get to in another slide here. In 2020, the council officially listed it as a goal, and we put that on the slide here, and that is to create and support an urban renewal plan and an authority. And so we're engaged in doing that. Urban renewal is a potential funding tool for a variety of capital infrastructure programs that have been identified through the various plans that we put together over the last 5 years. Next slide. This is a graphic showing what it is that we've been working on since 2016. So as I previously mentioned, we put together an economic development strategy. We also then put together a tourism strategy. We've never had either one of those documents for the community. We updated our transportation system plan, and then we finished up the Newberg Downtown Improvement Plan. 2017, we updated our water master plan. 2018, our wastewater master plan. 2019 was another kind of busy year. We did our community visioning program, and in that, urban renewal came up as another potential tool to fund infrastructure improvements. We also, council accepted our Riverfront master plan. And so that's the area generally from 9th Street south down to the Willamette River. And then we did our first iteration of our housing needs analysis to give us a better understanding about what our housing needs were going to be over the next 20 years. In 2020, we updated our housing needs analysis. That was actually accepted by council back in March earlier this year. We worked on an economic opportunities analysis, and the council just accepted that document last Monday. We did the urban renewal feasibility study. We formed an urban renewal agency in August of 2020 based upon the feasibility study. And then we did the land use implementation for the Riverfront area. So that was all the comprehensive plan, zoning, development regulations. So here we are in 2021. We just finished up in January an update to our transportation system plan for the Riverfront. We are in the process of updating our water and wastewater master plans for the Riverfront area, and that will be concluded in May. And then at the very top of this graphic, you can see in the far right-hand column, we're working on the urban renewal plan and report, and that's in progress. So we've done a lot of planning activity to get us to this particular point. And we've really listened to what came out of the community visioning and what the community wants to look like and feel like out until 2040. Next slide. So our Citizens Advisory Committee, so far they have met 12 times. They started their meetings back in January of 2020. And we've talked about background orientation and background on urban renewal. We talked about what the potential boundaries may be. Elaine and one of her sub-consultants from Tiberius Solutions, we worked on financial analysis and preliminary. We worked on the feasibility study and that draft in its final version. The committee did end up making a recommendation that was forwarded on to the City Council. We've been reviewing projects since November, and we started off with a long list of potential projects from all of those master plan work on the previous slide. And so the committee had a big task of winnowing, I'll call winnowing down that list, which started off at about $117 million, and we had to bring that number down significantly to meet our financial capacity. And in March, the committee approved that final project list, and we'll get into that a little later in the presentation. And as I mentioned, we started reviewing the plan components that Elaine has been working on. Next slide. So our members, John Bridges is our chair. Francisco Stoller is our vice chair. Both are citizens within the community. Stephanie Finley is our current council liaison. She is our council president. Angel Aguilar is a citizen. Josh Duder is currently the interim executive director of the Chamber of Commerce. Don Clements is on the committee representing Chehalis Park and Recreation District. Don Griswold was on the committee as a citizen. Joe Morlock, the superintendent of Newberg Public Schools. Molly Olson, who was the executive director at Newberg Downtown Coalition, and Lonnie Parrish, a business and property owner, citizen within the community. And then Cassandra Olvin, the public affairs chief with Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue. Next slide. So this is the graphic, the most current iteration of the proposed urban renewal district boundary. So it's kind of the light lavender color. It encompasses the downtown area, which covers the area that was studied as part of our downtown improvement plan. And I'll go clockwise. Then it goes down River Street between essentially 4th and down to 9th Street. Then it picks up the Riverfront area from the master plan work that we did on that. So 9th Street is the northern boundary of the Riverfront area, the Willamette River, and then the east boundary is generally Winooski Street, and the west boundary is Chehalis Creek. And then moving up from 9th Street back into the downtown is Blaine Street. And Blaine Street, the committee looked at some land that was both on the east and the west side of Blaine Street that had redevelopment opportunities. The reason for the River Street and the Blaine Street connections is related to transportation in the Riverfront area itself, being able to move workers and residents in and out and move them into the downtown. Next slide. So we did a lot of community engagement as we were going through the feasibility study. As we noted, we had a website that's been up. It has a lot of information that's there. There were some videos that were put together. We'll get to that in another slide. We prepared fact sheets in both Spanish and English. So we had a broad base for our community to understand what urban renewal is and what this program evaluation is trying to achieve. I mentioned those videos. I'll mention them a couple of times. And then we were out in the community. We were passing out flyers actually at different events and doing presentations at different service clubs, as well as the Ministerial Association. And that information was really directing people back to watch the videos. So we had a series of, of videos that were 2 to 3 minutes in length to help individuals understand how urban renewal works and the benefits it would provide in Newberg. Next slide. We prepared fact sheets. Again, we had these in Spanish and in English, and we were passing these out. They're also up on our website, and it gives you some background again as why are we doing urban renewal? Why are we looking at it in Newberg? The benefits of a program for the Newberg community overall. Next slide. The videos. So 6 videos were prepared. So Elaine did a great job doing the graphics, and they did a voiceover on that. But we were explaining, you know, what is urban renewal, why use it, what is the process that we're going through, what's the impact on taxing districts from this particular program, what are the impacts upon the school district, and Elaine will get into that a little bit later. And then how are these urban renewal dollars, commonly called tax increment financing funds, how are they distributed back to the urban renewal agency itself? Next slide. These are just some photos of the different groups I mentioned earlier. So we were at the farmers market, different organizations. So we were at Kiwanis Chamber, Newberg City Club, the Rotary, the Downtown Coalition, as well as to the city through the City Council and the Planning Commission, providing briefings as we were preparing that feasibility study. Next slide. So this is where I'm going to turn it over to Elaine to talk about the urban renewal feasibility study.
So this whole project started with the request of the City Council to prepare an urban renewal feasibility study. And then the Citizens Advisory Committee was selected to help guide both that, and if the City Council determined that they wanted to move forward, to guide that process. The questions that we were asked to answer in the feasibility study were if the proposed boundary would meet both the statutory limitations on assessed value for an urban renewal area and on acreage. For a city the size of Newberg, you may have up to 25% of your total assessed value and your total acreage within an urban renewal area. And this proposed area is beneath both of those limitations. We were asked to establish that blight occurs within the urban renewal area. Typically, that blight is determined by looking at the city's different master plans to look at what the infrastructure is like within the area and if there are deficiencies in the infrastructure. And in looking at all of the different master plans that Newberg has and their updates to those, it was very clear that there were many projects that were needed within both the downtown portion of the area and the riverfront portion of the area, and that those projects would meet the statutory definition of blight. We identified financial feasibility of the area, and that is basically looking at the area to try to determine what the amount of tax increment revenue, so that's the revenue gained through an urban renewal area, might be, and made projections on that. And then we examined the potential impacts on taxing districts. It's important to know that urban renewal is not a new tax to property owners. So your property taxes do not go up due to urban renewal, but it is a division of taxes from the overlapping taxing districts. So we did examine those impacts. We put together an executive summary that is also on the website, and then the full feasibility study is on the website. Next slide.
So this is where I get to jump back in again. So we're going to talk about the potential projects that the Citizens Advisory Committee had developed. And in their evaluation process, we actually took the proposed district and broke it into some sub areas to assist them to understand what infrastructure needs were in different locations. And so we came up with a final list of sub areas A through G. And as we go through the slides talking about the projects, I'll reference each one of those. So in the $2020 value, the improvements identified in the downtown area are just a little under $21 million. In the Riverfront area, they're just a little under 35 million. And then there's some administration costs calculated for 2020 that carry out over that 30-year horizon of this plan. So that value came to a little under $62 million to start with. And then as Elaine and our financial people run those numbers, she'll be able to tell you later in the presentation what that maximum indebtedness amount would be. Next slide. So this is our sub area A. And so this is the mill site. So between River Street and Winooski Street. And the committee spent a lot of time looking at this, and it's tailored off of what's in our Riverfront master plan, which is, again, it's available on site. And go to the community development pages and that information is there. But this is improvements for transportation, sewer, water, and storm drainage for the transportation system itself. And so you can see by the red, those are the roads that would be improved with the urban renewal dollars. So Winooski, a new road along the top of the bluff, and that came out of the Riverfront master plan discussions about the community being able to access and see the Willamette River. There's a lot of people or community members don't know that they have access or that there is some access to the Willamette River. And then the north-south streets are basically the opportunity to grid this off based upon how redevelopment occurs on that mill site over time. Next slide. Again, in sub area A, and this directly came out of the Riverfront master plan, was an Esplanade. And so this would be a multi-use path trail up along the top of the bluff. And it would have some overlooks that you could look down on the Willamette River out onto French Prairie. And so generally it parallels what we call the 14th Street extension until you get to the very, call it the southeast end of it, and then it deviates away from the roadway. But it would terminate down by the water line, what we call the waterline bridge. That's the old Highway 219 bridge. So part of this, in conversations we've had even with Chehalis Park and Recreation District, is, in the future, might that bridge be able to be repurposed and also used as a bike and ped trail as a route to be able to get to Shampooey Park in the future. Next slide. Sub-area B is south of the bypass and to the west of River Street. And here the projects are identified to do improvements to River Street, basically from the bypass south down to 14th Street. There's also rail crossing improvements that need to be done. We've had conversations with Oregon Department of Transportation Rail Division, and with redevelopment occurring south of the bypass and traffic volumes increasing, there is both vehicular, pedestrian, and bicycle safety issues crossing that rail line. And then there's improvements on 14th Street between College Street and South River Street. And so again, those are identified in red and the rail crossing is in blue. Next slide. Again, in sub area B is that Esplanade. And so this would run from the bypass as a multi-use path down River Street, and then it would turn and go down 14th, and again, follow the top of the bluff and come back and reconnect at Waterfront Street and then extend out to the cul-de-sac that was constructed as part of the bypass for Waterfront Street. And again, what we heard out of the Riverfront Master Plan is that ability to have those view corridors. The community was looking for a large park open space area along the Willamette River, And in that plan, we've identified that from the old landfill potentially being converted into a park, and everything from the bluff down to the river becoming park and open space. Next slide. Then we had subarea C, which is north of the bypass. And this one is related to wastewater, or what many refer to as sanitary sewer. And there are areas to the south of the bypass that actually end up flowing to the west, then going underneath the bypass, and then flowing back to the east, and they would end up in this pump station. And then there's some areas to the north up through Ewing Young Park and some existing residential, and that would be realigned, and it would all end up to this pump station, and then there'd be a force main, and it would go back towards River Street. And so it's to serve new development that would occur. Well, a lot of it would occur on the south side of the bypass. Next slide. Sub-area D. This includes an extension of Blaine Street. So you get to 9th Street today, and it kind of stops. It looks like a driveway that takes you into Ewing Young. But Blaine Street would continue kind of paralleling the railroad tracks just on its west side. And then it would come back and connect into College Street, just about where Weatherly Way connects today. And then College Street would be improved from 9th Street to 14th Street. And then again, because we have the rail line there, there's a rail crossing improvement that we've discussed with the Oregon Department of Transportation Rail Division. Next slide. The next improvement is what we call sub-area E. And that is South River Street between 9th and the bypass. And this is a transportation, sewer, water, storm drainage improvement. And again, it directly relates to access in and out of the riverfront area. Next slide. Sub-area F is continuing up South River Street. So this goes from 9th to 4th. And again, it is an improvement to enhance the accessibility into and out of the riverfront area. But it's not just the street itself. There are some other elements related to infrastructure that would be under the road that needs to be improved while that roadway is improved overall. Next slide. Sub-area G, this is Blaine Street. So we saw in sub-area C, Blaine Street, this is moving in further north, and Blaine Street having transportation improvements and then some selected infrastructure for sewer, water, and storm. There's missing sidewalks here. There's undersized water lines in Blaine Street. We have the right-of-way width that's necessary to do the improvements, but there's some underground infrastructure deficiencies that needed to be addressed. There's also, just on the west side of Blaine Street, there's land that's identified for high-density residential development. And so these infrastructure improvements would assist in that redevelopment of those properties over time. Next slide. And finally, area H, I said A through G, but it was actually A through H. So this is the downtown area. So this map is a little bit busy. The primary project of this is the First Street road diet. So a road diet comes out of the downtown improvement plan, and it's removing one travel lane and widening the sidewalks and making First Street a much more pedestrian friendly environment than what it is today. And so that would extend from the west end of the couplet to the east end of the couplet. The blue lines on this map are representing water line improvements that are necessary to do the infill development and the redevelopment opportunities that are here. Our water system, because it's the oldest part of town, is undersized to be able to accommodate that type of improvement. The green circles are traffic signals. And so this came out of our riverfront area in order to be able to move people in and out down river.
Doug froze on my screen.
He may have just lost his audio connection, so she'll pause here while we have technical difficulties. Okay, just dated myself with that reference. Oh, I've got him on the phone. Hang on just a second. Hi, Doug. Elaine, Doug is on the phone saying, can you continue, please? His computer crashed.
Oh, no. Yes, I will attempt to continue. Let's see, we talked about the road diet and then South River Street improvements and the traffic signals. And then 2 public parking lots within the area to help service the businesses within the area. So most of the improvements within this area are the same as the other sub areas. It's transportation and infrastructure improvements. Next slide. The other improvements are undergrounding the 2nd Street utilities from Grant Street to River Street. Next slide. Oh, there was a question, have the public parking lots been recommended? No, the locations are not designated yet. The impacts to taxing districts, a few minutes ago, I talked about the money that comes from tax increment financing and urban renewal doesn't come from an increase in property tax bills. It comes from a division of taxes from all of the overlapping taxing districts. This has a list of those taxing districts and the estimated amount of revenue that they would forego if an urban renewal area is established from the time the area is established until it terminates. So a projected 30-year time frame. The estimates are based on what their permanent rate is and on annual assessed value growth within the area of 6.5%. Assessed value is different from real market value. So when we all look at our tax bills, our taxes are based on our assessed value, which is lower than the real market value. And these estimates are based on those estimates of growth within the area. The Newberg School District and the Willamette Education Service District are indirectly impacted by urban renewal. They are funded by the state school fund on a per pupil basis, and there is no direct decrease in those state school fund allocations due to urban renewal. The legislature establishes those per pupil ratios every 2 years when they meet, and regardless of whether or not you have an urban renewal area in your locality, you will receive the same amount of monies through that allocation. The legislature understands that those property tax revenues also fund urban renewal areas and have figured as part of the state school fund, a way to backfill some of those funds through using other funds available to them to fulfill the per pupil basis needed in the state school fund. All of these property taxing districts continue receiving taxes on the value of the urban renewal area at the time it's established. The taxes that they forego are those taxes that represent increased assessed value over the time frame of urban renewal. Much of that would not occur except for urban renewal, because without all of these infrastructure projects, this growth, especially the growth in the riverfront area, would not occur. So although this projects a large amount of foregone property tax revenue, without the ability to provide the infrastructure to make this area build, that revenue wouldn't exist in the first place. Next slide. Hi, Doug, you're back. You're muted.
Okay,
Sorry about that, folks. Laptop crashed, had to go to iPad.
No problem.
So our next steps in this process, the Citizens Advisory Committee will be meeting on May 24th, and they will be receiving the final version of the Urban Renewal Plan and Report. At that meeting, we will be looking for a recommendation from the CAC, which we will then take on to the Urban Renewal Agency. And they have a meeting scheduled to review the plan and report on June 7th. Following that, then we start what is required in ORS 457, a confer consult process for 45 days, where we'll be sending the plan and the report to all of the taxing districts and providing briefings to all of those districts. We've identified June 22nd as a date to give a briefing to Yamhill County. That is in part the urban renewal plan in the riverfront portion of those sub areas has land that's outside of the city, but within the urban growth boundary. And so it requires an additional step by Yamhill County. Then we move on to a meeting with the Planning Commission, where they have to make findings that the urban renewal plan is in conformance with our comprehensive plan, goals and policies. And then from there, we move to this City Council for hearings. So we've identified August 2nd is the hearing date, and then August 16th is the date for the council to take a vote on the proposal. Next slide. So you may be wondering, how can you provide input in this world of COVID and everything being virtual? And so I tried to make it easy. You can send me an email or you can give me a call. So my email address is here. So it's doug.rux@newbergoregon.gov. You can also find it on the city website. If you can't remember, this PowerPoint presentation will be posted up onto the website tomorrow. So again, if you go to the community development section and go to planning, you can open up the tab for urban renewal and all of the information that the committee has been working on since January of 2020. This PowerPoint and the videos that I mentioned earlier in the presentation are all be available for you to review. So with that, Sue, I think we are to the point where we can, since now I'm working on my iPad, we can open it up for questions and answers and start promoting people up.
So Doug, there were a number of chat questions, and I don't know, Sue, should we deal with those first or?
Either flavor is best. Either one. I am not attached. I'm just here to be the Zoom host.
Okay, Doug may have a hard time seeing those on his iPad, so I'll just go through those and read them so everybody can hear them. And then Doug, most of these are Doug's questions. So from Jack Chris, have street sections including pedestrian and bicycle traffic been discussed for the various street improvements?
Yes, so street sections. So Brett Music, our senior engineer, the roadways that are identified and the improvements would all meet what's in our transportation system plan for the cross section, for right-of-way widths, curb-to-curb widths, sidewalk widths, planter strip widths.
Okay, the next question, have the location for the 2 public parking lots been selected or recommended? And then Molly typed into the chat that the Downtown Coalition is sponsoring a parking work group to work on parking downtown, and interested parties should email her at molly.olson, O-L-S-O-N, at newbergoregon.gov. And Doug, do you want to add any more on that?
Yeah, just on the parking, at this time, all we've identified from the CAC work is the need for 2 public parking lots downtown. No specific property has been identified at this time.
Okay. And then Mr. Chris also says, hooray for the First Street diet. I would suggest similar for Hancock. And from Meg Martin, will there be some type of public transportation between downtown and the riverfront?
That will need to be coordinated with the Yamhill County Transit area. Currently, there is not bus service. They have adopted a new transit plan, and we've identified 4 loops to occur. And so as transportation improvements would occur over time, there would need to be discussions with the transit area about modifications to transit routes. These transportation improvements initially will provide the opportunity for those bike and ped movements, in addition to vehicular traffic, to be able to move north and south between the Riverfront area and downtown.
And then Rob Felton, do the improvements for First Street include new sidewalks and decorative light poles like we have on Hancock?
Yes, that would be wider sidewalks. From what we have today is we remove one travel lane in each direction. As for the street lights and so forth, we'll have to look at, the project budget as we get to that project at that particular point in time. Right now, the focus is doing the road diet, widening the sidewalks, doing necessary underground infrastructure as part of that particular improvement. And the committee, when we were talking about pedestrian furniture and amenities, it got to the issue of financial capability to be able to do all of that. And so I cannot say specifically today that streetlights would be part of it, but I'm hoping that it would be in the future.
Susan Eisenberg, how will wildlife be affected? That is, will a wildlife corridor exist?
I'm assuming that's talking about down in the Riverfront area. And so with the large park open space area identified between Chehalem Creek and Rogers Landing, and we're not looking at that, and it would be part discussions with the park district, but it's more passive trails. The Esplanade is the more urban portion of that, which would be up at the top. But then there are the connections of stream corridors that run back to the north, back towards Ewing Young. And so those could function as those wildlife corridors between the Riverfront area, going underneath the bridge of the bypass, and going down that drainage, and then going back into Ewing Young.
Brian Doyle, how soon might all this happen? I'll take a stab at that and then Doug can add.
Okay.
Unfortunately, urban renewal is not a quick fix. It takes a while for that tax increment to begin collecting, and it increases over time. So it starts out slowly, and then as development occurs, and as that amount of taxes that is increased each year accumulates, you're able to start doing projects. As part of the plan and report that we're now preparing for Doug, there will be a section in that shows the amount of revenues over time, over each year, that are expected within the area. And it shows potential allocations, knowing that the Urban Renewal Agency can always adjust the timing of those projects, because maybe there's a federal grant or a state grant that comes through, but will only come to you if you have a match. And so your timing might move up on one project where you had it timed a little later. So it is estimated for a 30-year timeline, and that means those projects are spread out over that 30-year timeline. Doug, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you've got it, Elaine.
Jack Kriz again, has a parking structure been contemplated for downtown parking?
It was on the original list for consideration of a parking structure at the 2nd Street parking lot. Through the discussions with the CAC, that was not identified as a project within the plan. Instead, it was the 2 surface parking lots.
From Ron James, any thought of using the existing rail line along Blaine for passenger travel from downtown to and from the riverfront?
Yes, it was considered. So in our downtown improvement plan, we identified running a trolley from downtown down to the riverfront. It was also identified in our tourism strategy and within our riverfront master plan. Again, it was a project that was on the original list for consideration, but it did not advance forward. Does not mean it could not happen. We've had some conversations with some interested parties about forming a nonprofit and acquiring a trolley and running it on the rail tracks. The ultimate goal from all of these plans is we'd like to be able to someday be able to run a trolley from the Allison Inn all the way to the riverfront.
From Brian, is there a tentative date when working on River Street widening will be starting?
No, not yet. That's we're in the process of trying to identify the potential timing of when these various projects would occur, and we'll have a clearer picture of that by the time we get back to the CAC on May 24th.
And then Sue, the city recorder, posted in the chat where you can find this PowerPoint. And if anyone would like me to read that out loud, just type in, please read it. But it's basically where Doug had said it is. It's on the city website. Then you go to the planning page and then to urban renewal tax increment financing Newberg. So if you have any problems finding that at all, I think you can certainly follow up with Doug and he can send you a direct link. And then that is what's in the chat. So are there other people who would like to talk outside of the chat and join as a panelist so they can talk to everyone?
If you want to raise your hand or put in the chat box your name, then I'll promote you. Doug, we have 16 attendees now.
Okay. Well, Elaine and I are here to answer your questions. I will also note that we've been working on an informational video on the proposed urban renewal program that just got posted to the city's YouTube channel, and it will be pushed out through social media, and it'll also be on the city's website in the next couple of days.
There is a lot of information on the website, so feel free to dig into any and all of that. The videos are short and you don't have to listen to them all at one time, but they're really helpful, I think, in understanding the general concept of how urban renewal works. So even if you know that and don't need it, if you have a neighbor or friend who is wanting to know more about urban renewal or even why we're doing this, if you can ask them to just go on the website and look at some of the information, we would really love for people to be more informed than less informed.
So it looks like Brian, you got promoted. You have a question? Can't hear you, Brian. Still can't hear you, Brian.
I don't see anything more in the chat. Brian, if you're trying to ask something, oh, sorry, technical difficulties.
I understand, Brian.
Year, I think that's what we've all been saying. There is a question here from Alan Holstein or Holstein, depending on whether you grew up raising cows, which my family did. In the next 1 to 3 years, what and where will we begin to see the improvements?
Well, Blaine, you want to try that one because it's a revenue timing issue.
Right. And the next 1 to 3 years, you probably won't be getting much money, so you won't be seeing any improvements. What happens in urban renewal is that money starts accumulating, and as soon as you start getting enough that you can place a bond to borrow some money and be able to get a bigger portion of money, then you can start doing projects. And typically that doesn't happen until years 4 or 5, and sometimes later, depending on the area and what amount of development has occurred. So it really will be dependent on new development. And if new development doesn't start occurring down in the Riverfront area, your capacity to do projects in the first few years is relatively none. John is saying if anyone wants to chat with any of the committee members about any of this, we would welcome that. That's from John Bridges.
And again, John is our chair of our Citizens Advisory Committee. Other questions? Someone want to get promoted, ask a question? Anything else in chat?
John Bridges and Brian Doyle are asking to be promoted, so.
Okay.
I'm just working on that. Give me a sec. Oh, come on. So Brian, you've been promoted and I'm trying to.
Okay, go ahead, Barbara.
All right, this is Barbara Doyle. Since you said that we won't really see much in the way of these improvements for maybe the first 4 years or 5 years, if there are personal or private plans that would have some impact on this urban renewal, which side wins out, the private party ownership or the plans from urban renewal?
Well, if I'm understanding your question correctly, Barbara, let's say there was a private entity and they were looking to do a project.
Yeah.
And that project required a water line upgrade in conjunction with their particular development. We would then look at the revenue that we have on hand and timing wise, and might we be able to advance that project to do that water line project in conjunction with that private development?
Okay, that's a good enough answer because that's probably the best you can do.
Elaine, I think was spot on. In that first 3 years or 4 years, we're driven by the 3% increase that we're collecting. And so it's the new development is where we start to generate more of that tax increment. And with activities occurring down at the mill and that demolition that's underway, I'm sure many of you driven by, is, the city is actively working with the new owner about redevelopment opportunities and options for that mill site. But those take a lot of discussions and it's timing. We have a willing seller. Now we need to find a willing buyer and developer. Yeah. Or developers.
Thank you.
Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. So just going back to River Street, we live down here, and I was just thinking about the turn onto River Street from 99, as we're going to see more development down this area, and it's going to be one of the main avenues through to the riverfront. Is there going to be some sort of extension for that left-hand turn there? Because even right now, it backs up during the busy hours. So I'm just wondering if that's been thought about.
The traffic engineers would have to evaluate that as the traffic volumes increase. What we had to do was go through a process called a transportation planning rule analysis when we did the Riverfront master plan. And they had indicated that study indicated that that intersection would operate at what they call acceptable levels of service according to ODOT. But as development occurs, the engineers and ODOT would have to look at that left-hand turn. So I'm assuming you're talking about basically the southbound movement down 99, making the left onto River Street. And yes, I go that way every day. And so there are days, yes, when it backs up and it needs to be extended. The urban renewal district boundary does not extend any further east than River Street. So that would require finding other funds to do an extension of that left turn lane.
Okay, thank you for that response.
You're welcome.
Mr. Bridges?
Yes, thanks. I did want to just say what you read, Elaine, number one, but also I'll comment on Barbara Doyle's comment. You know, we specifically have recommended to the city and in turn to Elaine to make sure that we build into the plan ways for us to have opportunities to work with developers to leverage funding, as it also work with grant opportunities for some of these park opportunities where we might be able to provide matching funds to a state park grant. So really, one of our other recommendations is that the city keeps the committee as an advisory committee throughout the life of the plan. So we have that institutional knowledge that's always kind of every 2, 3, 4, 5 years, making sure that we're all looking at those opportunities and preparing ourselves for those things and leveraging all those sorts of opportunities, including the SDC funds that the city already has in their plans.
And with that, John brought up a good point, is that in the conversations with the Citizens Committee was having a standing advisory committee to the Urban Renewal Agency. And so I am taking the first set of bylaws to the agency on the 19th of April. And in that, I have a recommendation that they establish an advisory committee. And that advisory committee would then have to be determined how frequently they meet. But they could do a lot of the heavy lifting, just as the CAC has done, doing a more deeper dive into projects and timing on projects, and then they can make those recommendations back to the agency board. John, there's some comments or perspective you'd like to provide from the, as chair of the committee, over the work over the last 15 months?
Well, you know, my perspective, and I was just thinking about if I happen to be on that advisory committee, I think I'll be pushing my commitment to this to about the 30-year mark. Because I've been on the prior processes that attempted to do this. And frankly, you know, from my perspective, I think of people like Dave Hageberg, who's been instrumental in getting the bypass funded to help our community. And, you know, sometimes these things take a really long time and they take many efforts, but we are uniquely situated because the bypass has had the first phase built to really take advantage, and I should say, and because the mill site has been sold to a company that is dedicated and experienced in redevelopment, we really are poised to be able to use this legislative resource to maximize what we can do for the community and really build some nice living wage industrial jobs down in the Riverfront area, and then improve our downtown area, particularly on the West End, as you mentioned, where there really could be some nice redevelopment that will also provide, you know, really very high quality job opportunities.
I know one of the questions that commonly comes up in my conversations with people is, well, how many urban renewal plans exist within the state of Oregon? And the recent number that's actually in our video that's coming out is there are over 130 of these districts around the state of Oregon. So it's not something that's new. It's been tried. Many communities, small and large, all across the state.
Yeah, and even in Yamhill County, the video mentions there's already 3 in existence. One in McMinnville, so a community in Yamhill County that's larger than us, but also one in Dundee and one in Carlton, both communities that are smaller than us. And if we think about Carlton, they had the granary area where they've seen some really nice redevelopment and job production that may not have happened or may have been delayed significantly. So it really is a nice tool to help redevelop areas and provide for job growth. And I would say we were laser focused on making sure our projects did that. And some of the things where people asked about X, Y, or Z project that maybe didn't meet the list, those things fell away because they weren't going to create infrastructure that would lead to job growth and to development of industrial and commercial mixed use, things like that. If it only benefited potential residential growth, that was lowest priority. We're really focused on job growth and taking advantage of the increasing increment.
I'd like to say thank you to Doug and John and all the volunteers for the planning effort, because I really appreciate that.
You're welcome, Brian.
There's another question here on the chat. Is there a plan for additional vehicle access to the riverfront area? For example, access through the mill site via Winooski/219, or even an exit from the bypass. This would ease the stress on River and Blaine.
So we do have a constraint with the bypass. It is an expressway. It has no access. The access points for the expressway are at 219 in the bypass and Highway 99 and the bypass in Dundee. No access points in between. In the Riverfront Master Plan, not knowing how exactly the property would redevelop, when we did that plan, the property was up for sale. We use what we planners often do is we showed some arrows as some potential locations where roads might go through. And so in that sub area A drawing that I showed you is that we do have a primary road, that Bluff Road, that would take you from River Street to Dogridge to Winooski to 219. And so from a transportation analysis, we have three primary ways to get into the riverfront. That would be Winooski Road coming off of Highway 219 to the mill site. We have River Street north-south, 99 to the mill site, and then the future Blaine Street extension from 9th Street to College Street. And we talked at the committee level that those are three primary transportation corridor improvements that are necessary. Winooski and River Street are major collector roadway classifications. So we tried to look at, distributing the traffic out so that it doesn't all fall on River Street.
I don't see any new comments in the chat.
Okay. Any other comments from anybody? Either chat or be promoted?
I'm not seeing any hands raised, Doug.
Okay. Well, if we don't have any more questions, either through chat or somebody wants to verbally do those by being promoted, I would like to thank everybody for spending an hour of your evening with Elaine and Sue and I to be able to answer your questions, provide you some more information in regards to the proposed urban renewal program. Again, and I know we've mentioned this a number of times, there's lots of information on the project webpage. Sue did post that up in the chat. You can watch the videos. I would encourage everybody to watch the videos. They're very, very informative. all of the information that the committee has looked at. All that is there. If you were interested in more details on these infrastructure improvements, you can go to the committee packet that was on March 8th. And it actually breaks down the details when I was talking about, well, it's not just a road project, there's infrastructure, there's water, sewer, and storm, and you can see all the level of detail. Those kinds of details will end up a little bit rolled up, but they will end up in the plan, in the report information that will come back to the committee in May. So again, thank you all. I appreciate it. If you have questions, you can call me or email me. And again, the PowerPoint will be up on the project webpage in the morning. Thank you.